This Sunday, the special counsel election. It's not just Donald Trump's campaign that may go through a courtroom. Attorney General Merrick Garland appoints a special counsel to investigate President Biden's son.
I have concluded that it is in the public interest to appoint him as special counsel.
While former Vice President Mike Pence asked Republican primary voters to shift their support away from his former boss.
There's almost no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could pick the American president.
How much will Mike Pence make January 6th central to his campaign against his former running mate? I'll ask him this morning. Plus, challenging Biden. The new special counsel appointment fuels more criticism from Republicans.
If he were a Republican, he would have been in jail a long time ago.
Biden is also facing critics from within his own party on his capacity to serve. I'll talk to Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota, who is actively calling for more primary challengers to Biden. And red alert.
That vote in Ohio was pretty sobering.
Ohio voters deliver a victory to supporters of abortion rights and offer another warning sign for Republicans.
If Republicans are just focused on one issue, they're going to have a bit of a challenge.
Support for legal access to abortion is winning inside red and blue states, from Kansas to Kentucky to Michigan. Will it be a motivating factor for voters in 2024? Joining me for insight and analysis are Politico Playbook co-author Eugene Daniels, Republican strategist Brendan Buck, Simone Sanders Townsend, former chief spokesperson for Vice President Kamala Harris, and Politico national correspondent Betsy Woodruff Swan. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
And a good Sunday morning. In case you needed another sign that the 2024 campaign will be shaped by legal dramas in courtrooms in Washington, Delaware, Miami, New York, and Atlanta, rather than door-to-door in the state of Iowa, we got a reminder again on Friday. Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that Trump appointee and U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who's been investigating Hunter Biden for alleged tax and gun crimes for 5 years now, had now requested special counsel status, and he's going to get it, after a plea deal collapsed in court a few weeks ago when a federal judge balked at granting Hunter Biden expansive immunity.
The appointment of Mr. Weiss reinforces for the American people the department's commitment to both independence and accountability in particularly sensitive matters.
Now, President Biden's son could face a trial at a time when Democrats were hoping to keep the campaign's focus on Donald Trump's legal problems. Now, the two cases, they're hardly comparable. Donald Trump is now under federal indictment for attempting to overturn the 2020 election and for mishandling classified documents that included a U.S. military plan of attack on Iran. President Biden has not been charged with any wrongdoing, and at least so far, Hunter Biden's alleged crimes are 2 years of not paying taxes, which his attorneys say he has since paid, and lying about his drug use at the time of a gun purchase. And clearly, Hunter Biden is not a candidate for president. But President Biden's handling of the case has raised questions at a time when voters already have doubts about his age and political standing. Biden brought his son to a state dinner just 2 days after the plea deal that has since collapsed was announced. And he has repeatedly defended him, denying wrongdoing altogether, even though Hunter Biden himself has pled guilty.
I'm confident.
First of all, my son's done nothing wrong. I trust him. I have faith in him.
Thank you. Please, come on, thank you. Did you encourage him to take a plea deal, Mr. President?
In total, there are now 3 special counsels actively at work involved in this presidential campaign. Jack Smith, named in November to oversee the ongoing criminal investigations into Trump's handling of classified documents and his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Robert Hur, he was named in January to investigate the handling of classified documents found at President Biden's former office and his home. And now, of course, David Weiss. The decision to delay the appointment of Weiss as a special counsel is also a bit hard to understand. Even the language Garland used announcing his appointment Friday, emphasizing independence and accountability in particularly sensitive matters, are almost the exact same phrases that he used when appointing Jack Smith 9 months ago to oversee the Trump cases. The legal calendar will continue to overshadow this political calendar. Trump's lawyers were actually in court on Friday, hashing out the details of what he is allowed to say publicly about the January 6th case in an effort to protect witnesses and the sensitive documents he's about to receive from the Justice Department in discovery. And prosecutors in Georgia, where Trump is likely to be indicted a 4th time in the last year have indicated they plan to present their case to a grand jury later this week. Still, Donald Trump's rivals are going through the motions of a traditional political campaign, even as he leads them nationally by more than 30 points, and the legal dramas just blot out the sun. And they're trying to catch Trump in Iowa, where he has a dominant lead despite visiting the state just 6 times since announcing his campaign in November. This weekend, they posed with the famous butter cow and food on a stick at the Iowa State Fair. And despite going through the motions of campaigning against him, Trump's rivals have passed up numerous opportunities to criticize him for his, at current count, 78 felony counts. But they jumped at a chance to comment on Hunter Biden.
It just seems to me that they're going to find a way to give him some type of soft glove treatment. And I don't understand why you would appoint this guy to be the special counsel.
Why did it take 2 years to do this? Why did they say Hunter Biden and not the Biden family? You know, why did this suddenly come up when there was all of a sudden the Biden pay-to-play conversation? I don't trust it, but the American people don't trust the Department of Justice.
And joining me now to unpack all of this is former FBI senior official and former U.S. Attorney Chuck Rosenberg, who is an NBC News legal analyst. Chuck, you're going to be a regular here on the show at this point. We may have to call you a co-host. So explain this to me. Why now did the Attorney General choose to make David Weiss a special counsel when, again, I go back, the same rationale he used for Donald Trump's special counsel clearly applies to here.
And, by the way, Mr. Garland had described David Weiss's running room as sort of plenary, right? That he had the independence he needed to make his own decisions in the case. So why give him this extra title? It seems somewhat cosmetic to me, Chuck.
So is there additional tools that he has now that he didn't have before? What are those tools? At
the edges, yes. It means he can bring charges in other districts on his own signature. But frankly, he could have done that if he needed to previously. So again, I think the right word here is cosmetic. It doesn't really change the tilt of the earth.
So then the motivation here for the Attorney General is simply is he worried that the cases against Trump were going to look biased if he didn't do this?
Well, there seemed to be a drumbeat to appoint a special counsel to investigate at least Hunter Biden, if not the Biden family. Mr. Weiss, the special counsel, now has the authority to take the investigation wherever he thinks it ought to go. There's a problem, I think, generally with the special counsel regulations. And there's another problem that worries me even more. It's this. I don't think Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump, for that matter, should be treated any better or any worse than any other person under investigation. They both deserve to be treated fairly. Whatever you may think of them, they deserve to be treated fairly. Special counsels, though, bring an intense focus on just one or two people, and that can be corrosive.
And it's almost, so then what you're saying is almost as unfair. They're not getting treated the way others would be treated by the Justice Department.
Right, and so that worries me. And to appoint a special counsel, an attorney general has to find extraordinary circumstances.
He keeps finding extraordinary circumstances, quite a few.
Which makes me think it's becoming rather ordinary. We've had 5 special counsel in the last 6 years. And I don't mean this in any way against those individuals. They're principled people. They were doing the jobs they were asked to do. Rather, I worry institutionally whether having so many special counsel under so many quote-unquote sets of extraordinary circumstances corrodes the department.
It seems to undermine the whole rationale of putting a former federal judge. The whole point was to try to take the politics out of this, and he is essentially conceding he is perceived to be too biased to oversee these cases.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, that's what it looks like. I know that's not what he's saying.
That's not what he's saying, but I think it's a great point, and it goes to a larger issue. So the design of the Department of Justice, Chuck, the design is that it be staffed by career people, that the political layer is extraordinarily thin. FBI has almost 40,000 men and women. One is a political appointee. Every U.S. attorney's office in the country has at most, one political appointee.
Very quickly on Donald Trump's attorneys arguing for what he can and can't say. The judge, everybody's been wondering, what is the stick? How is she going to try to enforce any penalty? Moving up the trial date seemed to be an interesting stick that she chose to use. Do you think that's probably effective enforcement?
Well, you might be able to say the shorter the period between now and the trial date, the less damage he can do by speaking publicly about the case. she's in a tough spot because he absolutely has a right to campaign and he has First Amendment rights. On the other hand, you can't interfere with the fair administration of justice or tamper with witnesses. So she's going to have to watch this very closely, but it's not an easy thing for her to do.
All right. Chuck Rosenberg getting us started this morning again, the courtrooms instead of the primary trail. Mr. Rosenberg, thank you, sir. And joining me now is former Vice President Mike Pence. Mr. Vice President, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you, Chuck.
Let me just start with your reaction to the Attorney General's decision to appoint U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who was an appointee of the Trump and Pence administration, his decision to make him a special counsel in the Hunter Biden probe. Do you approve of that decision?
Well, first, let me say, Chuck, I'm running for president because I think this country's in a lot of trouble. I think Joe Biden has weakened America at home and abroad, but frankly, the pattern of the Justice Department during our 4 years in the White House and since has undermined public confidence in equal treatment under the law. And while I welcome the appointment of a special counsel, which is, of course, appropriate and is a minimum where the Attorney General has a potential conflict of interest, I'm also comforted by the fact that Congress is going to continue to do its work. I'm confident that House Republicans are going to continue to bring forward the facts in this case. The American people have a right to know whether or not President Biden's family benefited or that he himself benefited when he was serving in the job that I had as Vice President of the United States in a financial way from foreign nationals. These are facts the American people have a right to get to the bottom of. I am hopeful that Special Counsel Weiss will do his job without fear or favor, but I have confidence that Jim Jordan, Congressman Comer, and others will continue to do their job for the American people.
Look, I couldn't help but notice you had said that the Justice Department, even in the 4 years that you guys oversaw it, you thought also didn't seem to conduct investigations fairly. Why do you think this is? How is it that this is a bipartisan problem that you're identifying?
Well, look, I mean, it started in 2016 when James Comer gave Hillary Clinton a pass, right? That no other American would have gotten. But then what we found out since is the truth about what was going on during the Mueller investigation. You know, I lived through that for 2.5 years when we were busy rebuilding our military, cutting taxes, unleashing American energy, securing our border. All the while, we actually had FBI agents that were falsifying documents and pushing a political agenda within the Justice Department. It's one of the reasons why I tell people that if I have the privilege of being president of the United States, we're not just going to have a new attorney general and a new FBI director, Chuck, but I'm going to clean house on the whole top floor of the Justice Department and demand that we have men and women who are respected on both sides of the aisle as people of integrity who will apply the rule of law in this country equally to every American.
Look, I want to get to the indictment on the former president here and a specific point here having to do with the elector scheme. Because earlier this month, you told a colleague of mine here that you didn't know a lot about the efforts to secure fake electors until after the fact. But it was interesting in your book, you brought up the fake slate of electors in a meeting with the Senate parliamentarian on January 3rd. In your book, you said this. I asked her a direct question referring to the Senate parliamentarian. Are there any alternate electors from any state? She told me there were not. I mentioned that I had heard that some alternate electors had been sent from several of the disputed states. So this was on January 3rd. What can you tell us about what you knew about this elector scheme on January 3rd that prompted you to ask this question?
Well, I just heard what was being talked about in the press at the time, Chuck, but I thought it was important. Look, in January 2017, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And under the Constitution, states certify elections. And while there were irregularities in states, maybe a half a dozen states around the country that changed the rules in the name of COVID, we challenged those in 60 court cases. Right. Once the courts had reviewed those and the states certified them, I wanted to make sure that we were operating on January 6th in a way that was consistent with the Constitution, consistent with the laws of the country. And that's the reason that I sat down with the parliamentarian. I looked through the process. I was determined to hear the objections that Republicans were planning to bring, Chuck, and many did bring.
Right.
I mean, you remember Democrats brought objections to Electoral College votes in 3 of the last 4 elections that Republicans prevailed. There was nothing unusual about that.
None of it, right.
But I did ask the parliamentarian.
Under the law.
I did ask the parliamentarian very directly, Chuck.
Right.
I asked her because I was hearing rumors. I was reading in the newspaper that there were alternate electors. I asked her point blank.
Was anybody in the White House telling you this?
From any state? And she said there was not. I don't recall that. I just remember hearing it in the public. And I wanted a definitive answer whether or not the parliamentarian had received any additional electoral votes. She had not. So as you know, we actually changed the language as those Electoral College votes were recorded. But look, you know, Chuck, I've told you many times, I said it again at the Iowa State Fair. I had no right to overturn the election. The Constitution is quite clear. As Vice President, my job was to preside over a joint session of Congress where the Constitution says the Electoral College votes shall be opened and shall be counted. And let me ask you this. I did my duty that day.
Donald Trump had said this week that he never asked you to disregard the Constitution and that he never said that you were too honest. Either of those things true?
Well, look, you could check his tweets, I think, on the day of, the day before. I mean, the president was quite clear and quite public that he thought that I had the authority to either reject or return votes to the states.
So you stand by the too honest, that he said you're too honest. You stand by that remark?
No basis. I do, Chuck. I mean, it's part of a dialogue that happened between the president and me, and that was related, I think, to a bogus lawsuit that was brought to try and force my hand to have a federal judge say that I had the right to throw out votes. Look, there's almost no idea more un-American than the idea that any one person could choose which votes to count for President of the United States. The American people know, as I heard from dozens of people at the Iowa State Fair, Chuck, the American people know the presidency belongs to them alone, and no one person has ever had that authority or ever should under our system.
Were you surprised that Mark Meadows was not listed as a co-conspirator? Because you had told me, and you mentioned in your book, you thought he was leading the former president down this path on election interference and all the different things and all the people he was bringing into the room. Did it surprise you he wasn't on this indictment?
Well, Chuck, I don't remember saying anybody was leading it. I remember saying there was a group of crackpot lawyers that the chief of staff allowed to be in the Oval Office that, frankly, should have never been allowed on the ground.
You told me you didn't think the chief of staff served the president
of the United States.
Yeah. You had said in various ways.
That's exactly what I just said, Chuck. I'm happy to repeat it. Look, the chief of staff's supposed to be a gatekeeper. You're supposed to make sure that people that are getting into the Oval Office have the credibility to be there. And frankly, this group of lawyers that were allowed to counsel the president to tell him what his itching ears long to hear is that I had some right to reject votes or return votes to the state. There was no basis in that in history, but. You know, look, Chuck, I think our Constitution is more important than any one man or any one man's career, including mine. I took the stand I took that day because of that oath that I took. And I couldn't be more encouraged, Chuck, as one person after another, not just in Iowa this last week, but in New Hampshire the week before. More and more Americans are coming up to me and expressing their appreciation for the stand they took. They know I chose to keep my oath to the Constitution that day, and if I'm president of the United States, I always will.
I want to ask you, though, you're very careful in what you talk about, whether Donald Trump's a nominee, whether you can support him again. If you thought he violated the Constitution, how can you support Donald Trump again for president?
Well, Chuck, what I've said is I'm happy to meet the criteria for the upcoming Republican presidential debates. I'm incredibly proud that More than 40,000 Americans in just 9 weeks have supported our campaign, made it possible for us to qualify for the debate stage. And in fact, Chuck, I think I'm actually going to qualify for the second debate before we get to the first one, because more Americans are seeing that my consistent conservative record, my years as vice president, my years as a governor here in Indiana, my years as a House conservative leader for 12 years are really just what the nation needs. This is no time for on-the-job training. This is no time for distractions. We need leadership on day one.
Do you consider yourself
that'll be able to provide the team and the vision to turn this country around? And I can.
Do you consider yourself a MAGA Republican?
I'm incredibly proud of what we did in the Trump-Pence administration for 4 years, and you better believe it. In those 4 years, after 8 years of the slowest recovery since the Great Depression, 8 years under Barack Obama and Joe Biden that saw military cuts that hollowed out our military, 8 years of liberals on our courts. Under the Trump-Pence administration, with the support of MAGA Americans, we literally did make America great again.
Do you feel like you're a MAGA Republican or not?
That pandemic struck. And look, I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. I've always said that. People who know me know those are my values, those are my ideals, and I really believe that the agenda that I've always been about, that I'm looking forward to taking to that debate stage, is the agenda that'll bring this country all the way back.
And believe it or not, I do want to try to ask you one question about something you did this week. You rolled out an energy plan. The Wall Street Journal, I think, was complimenting you by characterizing it as drill, baby, drill. A, do you accept that as a compliment? And B,
yes.
Do you think the government, though, should play a role in trying to find renewable energy to replace fossil fuels at some point? It doesn't sound like you think the government should play that role.
Well, look, gasoline prices jumped back up this week. Remember $2 a gallon, Chuck? I sure do. That happened under our administration. We unleashed American energy. It was an all-of-the-above energy strategy. We achieved American energy independence in 3 short years. Joe Biden launched a war on energy on day one. He shut down the Keystone and Dakota pipelines. Energy prices, gas prices are still up 60%. Electricity prices are up 25%. We laid out a vision following on my plan to tackle inflation. We laid out a vision this last week, not just to achieve energy independence. It's one of the things your colleagues over at the Wall Street Journal neglected to mention. I also believe not only can we achieve American energy independence again, but I believe with the right policies going forward, we can reclaim our role as the leading producer of energy in the world by 2040. It'll take leadership. It'll take a commitment to American energy independence. On day one of a presidency that I'd be privileged to serve in, we'll fight to restore that American energy strength and leadership and dominance in the world.
Former Vice President Mike Pence, sounds like you got a night at home, which is rare on the campaign trail. I'm glad you did. Be safe on the trail, and we'll see you on the debate stage.
Thanks so much, and Chuck, I appreciate you having me on.
You got it. When we come back, he wants President Biden to have more competition to win his party's nomination in 2024. Meet Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota. He joins me next. Welcome back. President Biden currently faces just 2 minor Democratic challengers. Robert Kennedy Jr., he has a famous name, but he's a lawyer and a vaccine skeptic whose candidacy has been boosted by people like Steve Bannon and financed in part by MAGA donors, believe it or not. Then there's Marianne Williamson. You may remember her from 2020. She's a self-help author and was on the debate stage briefly in 2020. Academic Cornel West is vying for the Green Party nomination and could pull votes from the left. And West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin is flirting with an independent run and may leave the party to do that. And now Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips is calling for a more competitive Democratic primary, saying voters don't want a coronation, they want a competition. Phillips, who is in his 3rd term representing suburban Minneapolis, let me tell you a little bit about him. He lost his father in Vietnam. After business school at the University of Minnesota, Mr. Phillips joined the family business, Phillips Distilling. He went on to help build Talenti Gelato into a top-selling gelato brand and also opened Penny's Coffee, a small business in the Twin Cities. And he is, like I said, in his 3rd term. Phillips has denounced, by the way, the no labels attempt to fill a 3rd party ticket, but he has called for serious Democratic primary challengers to President Biden. And last week he met with Democratic donors in New York about the race, in potentially entering it himself if no one else does. Congressman Phillips, welcome to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you, Chuck.
If I sum this up right, you are not interested in being a candidate for president technically yourself right now, or are you?
That's a fair statement.
Okay.
What I'm technically and legitimately doing is representing. I'm a representative, and I'm representing what I believe to be the majority of the country that wants to turn the page. Tired of the meanness and the fear-mongering of Donald Trump. I would like to see Joe Biden, a wonderful and remarkable man, pass the torch, cement this extraordinary legacy.
You don't want him to run for re-election?
I believe what's in the best interest of the country. And by the way, this is not how everybody thinks, but I do believe a majority wants to move on. I hear from way too many people. Now, the news was that I was meeting with donors. The fact is, I listen to normal Americans every day and my own feelings. And
is this all about age?
No, this is about how people feel. By the way, it's not about what's real all the time. It's about how people feel. People want to turn the page. I think that's fair to say. As a Democrat, I adore Joe Biden. He saved this country. He can cement his legacy. My real call to action right now is not about me. The call to action is to ask the president to pass the torch. There is an extraordinary bench of people ready to go, proximate,
who would you like to see in this
position.
race?
I would like to see a moderate governor, hopefully from the heartland, from one of the 4 states that Democrats will need.
So let's see, Gretchen Whitmer. You'd like to see her, or is it Tim Walz, your home state governor, Tony Evers? Help me out here.
You just said a few names I think would be great. Josh Shapiro. There are a number of people. J.B. Pritzker. Some people have asked me that I not use their names because of this institutional fear that it might impact you down the road. This is the time to meet the moment. And I'm doing something that I know it's unpopular as a Democrat, but I'm speaking truth. That's my job. My duty is to the people I represent, but also to represent the mass majority. And I want to say this about Democrats. It's really important. Joe Biden right now is down 7 points in the 4 swing states that will decide the next election. He has historically low approval numbers, Chuck. There are about 55% of Democrats would like to see an alternative. I can keep going down the list. The fact of the matter is
everything you're saying we've all heard in private as well. Why do you think it's all private? Why do you think this hand-wringing is only really gone public through you?
It's very simple. People are focused on self-preservation and not principle. There is no political reward in the United States right now for simply speaking the truth. Look at what happened to my Republican colleagues who dared do the right thing and support the Constitution. Support the Constitution, the only thing to which we're duty-bound. Look at what happened to them. It is not good to get out of line. It's not good to raise your hand, stand up, shout a little bit at a time we need it more than ever. And I'm afraid that that's the culture in this institution here in Washington, D.C.
And I saw you believe the Hunter Biden news actually reinforces this even more, don't you?
I don't think the president is corrupt. I think the investigation will show that. But, and this is the important part, it's the image. It's what the news will do. We know what era we live in partisanship. It is the attachment to the president. Most people aren't watching Meet the Press every weekend.
Wouldn't this happen to any Democratic nominee?
It probably will, and it saddens me. And
Okay.
and these are the people I'm trying to represent right now, Chuck, the people who are sick and tired of this nonsense. We have a duopoly, we have a political industrial complex that if they agree on anything, it's the status quo. And by the way, now I have trouble with Donald Trump. I do not have trouble with Trumpers who are trying to find somebody to change this system. The hardware is fine. The software is a problem. The people with whom we're populating the system, and I understand the need for transparency. We need to restore faith in government. We should do that in a thoughtful, meaningful, legitimate, and bipartisan manner, and it can be done. We need leaders in the next generation to do so, and I'm just simply expressing that point of view that I think is shared by a majority of Americans.
What can President Biden do to reassure you he is up to a second term?
I'm not saying he's not up to a second term. What I'm saying is look at the data. I listen. My job is to listen. I do it every single day back in Minnesota.
Right. Can he
all around
change the
country.
data?
That's the challenge. I come from the marketing world. You just explained my background. Sometimes you got a product that is extraordinary, meets the moment, you think is going to be the next big thing, and it just doesn't happen. And in business, you got to recognize it because the data speaks the truth. The data is speaking the truth right now. And if nobody's willing to talk about it before it's too late, that's the key.
The case against what you're talking about is basically the history of our lifetimes, okay? You go back, the last 4 sitting presidents who had serious primary challengers, that party lost the White House.
But
Chuck,
why did they?
We can go back to LBJ, but also Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter,
Ronald
George
Reagan.
H.W. Bush.
But why were they primaried? Because people recognized they were weakened. The country was ready to turn the page. Now we could have an hour debate on this subject. Now, I understand that. I don't want to be. I ran for Congress in 2016. After the 2016 election, I woke up that next morning. My teenage daughters were in tears. I promised them I would do something. I'm not going to be quiet now, 5 years later, when the same trauma could be afflicting the country if Donald Trump is reelected. So I will do nothing to ensure that Donald Trump is reelected. But Chuck, it's really important that people know this. I'm doing just the opposite. And if people aren't willing right now to have that conversation, to have the discussion, and most importantly, to present some alternatives, how in the world are we going to look at these numbers and say everything's okay? But hopes and dreams and prayers, I love them. They don't solve gun violence. They don't give health insurance to Americans, right? And they sure as heck won't change the numbers that I'm seeing right now.
Have you talked to Joe Manchin? You want him to run in a Democratic primary instead of as an independent for no labels?
I want anybody who wants to run, Joe Manchin, Cornel West, any of the governors.
You want him in the primary?
In the primary. That's why we have primaries, because that doesn't undermine the likelihood of returning, in this case, a Democrat to the White House. So that is the key. Enter the primary, my friends. Everybody who is on the bench, meet the moment. Don't wait 5 years. We need you now.
When are you going to make a decision? You're waiting for somebody who you've said with
I'm
bigger
not waiting.
name to come in. How long are you going to wait?
Waiting is like hopes and prayers. I'm actively inviting, encouraging, to some degree imploring that people who are ready and know it's probably time to do so, take the chance.
You met with donors. Are they directly going to some of these candidates and pleading with them to get in or not?
Well, Chuck, if donors and average, everyday, wonderful, normal Americans are coming to me, of all people, you don't think they're approaching those people in much higher numbers with even more frequency? No, I know. No, I know they are. Okay. And I'll make the decision once I do my darndest in the next month or so to encourage others to do so. Please, this is an appeal to everybody of good conscience and good character. Let's turn the page and imagine how fun, hopeful, and exciting it would be. We're going to do it.
Dean Phillips, Democrat from suburban Minnesota, thanks for coming out.
Thank you, Chuck.
Perspective, and we will see you hopefully at this table when you make your decision.
I look forward to it.
All right. Before we go to break, at least 93 people as of this morning have died in that devastating wildfire on Maui this week, making it now the deadliest natural disaster in Hawaii's history, and it's now the nation's deadliest wildfire in more than a century. If you want to help, please consider giving to these organizations that we have vetted: the Maui Food Bank, the American Red Cross, or the Hawaii Community Foundation. For more information, you can go wherever you follow Meet the Press on social media. We have those links. When we come back, the 2024 campaign is now clouded by not one, not two, but three special counsels investigating a sitting president, a former president, and the sitting president's son. Will the legal drama overshadow everything else? Panelists next. Welcome back, panelists here. Betsy Woodruff-Swan, national correspondent for Politico. Politico playbook co-author Eugene Daniels, so Politico owes us a lot this week. Brendan Buck, the former advisor to House Speakers Paul Ryan and John Boehner, and Simone Sanders Townsend, host of Simone and the former chief spokesperson for Vice President Kamala Harris, also part of the Biden campaign. Betsy, you were in the courtroom when the Hunter Biden plea deal fell apart. You were covering that story live. Did you think 2 weeks later you were covering a special counsel?
In the courtroom that day, it was clear that things were going totally sideways. And it was clear that one of the most basic things Justice Department prosecutors and defense attorneys are always supposed to do before rolling out a plea deal that they had not done. What they had not agreed on, according to this court hearing, was just how much protection Hunter Biden would receive from other future criminal charges from DOJ. And at the same time, in that totally wacky, bizarro world hearing, Justice Department prosecutors also said they were still investigating Hunter Biden, and they refused to give any elaboration on what they meant by that. So it's not surprising at all that 2 weeks later, when DOJ and those defense lawyers went back to the drawing board, they couldn't change where they were at on just how much the plea deal would limit the Justice Department. That was the key issue. How much continued criminal exposure did Hunter face? They couldn't agree on it, and it's not a surprise that now DOJ says they're headed to trial.
Eugene, I can't help but bring up what Chuck Rosenberg said. He just thought this appointment was cosmetic. Yeah. Which makes you think that Garland is almost so worried about perception. Are we focused on the reality?
Yeah, one of the things about Garland from the very beginning, anyone that you talk to who was a part of the actual choosing of Merrick Garland, is that they were always worried that he was someone who was going to stay way too far back. He was going to be someone who was going to be doing special counsels because he was so concerned with the perception.
I thought the whole point of a circuit court judge was to avoid a special. That was the whole idea. Exactly. You're bringing in somebody that's been got bipartisan confirmation here.
Exactly. And he is, but there's something about the way that Merrick Garland sees the world. One, the 4 years of Donald Trump and the DOJ and those fights, that he just wanted to make sure that there was not even people couldn't even sniff it out that there was something going on wrong. And that's what we're seeing, special counsel after special counsel after special counsel.
Simone, is this going to harm the campaign more personally because President Biden, you can't talk to him about this than it does practically, or do you think this is pretty harmful to the campaign?
I think that this is something that President Biden is being talked to about. The question is it a big group roundtable conversation? And I would argue to say no. If you look at the Ipsos poll right after the plea deal that then fell apart, but the plea deal that was announced for Hunter Biden, Americans who were polled and who were asked, they viewed this as a personal issue for Hunter and not an issue for President Biden. And so right now, it is not actually affecting the way that people are, considering voting in 2024.
Though, Brendan, you can't help but watch all this play out. And it's like Donald Trump has been trying to bring Biden's brand down to him. Goes back to 2018 when he sent Rudy Giuliani to Ukraine. He's been desperate, and he did it.
Yeah.
And it's Joe Biden's own Attorney General that just announced the investigation.
Yeah, I mean, it's basic politics, trying to turn your opponent's strength into a weakness. And one of the things that I think Joe Biden was elected to do was to clear out the mess in the White House, bring ethics and decency back. And this is clearly an effort to do that. Now, I think the White House and the president's reelection need to take this a bit more seriously than what they're doing. It was very easy for a long time for Democrats to just say, well, that's stuff on the crazy right-wing websites.
They could call it House Republican stuff, right?
Yeah, and now if it's going to be in trial, it's going to be front page news everywhere. I think they need to appreciate that this could damage him pretty seriously.
I want to bring something up, though, about the whole legal. Let me show you this excerpt from an Axios focus group about the indictments. Michigan swing voters from our friend Rich Tao. Here it is.
Who could tell me what this latest indictment is related to? In other words, what event? Who could tell me what this is related to? Without blurting it out. 5 of you. Shantae, what is it about?
I'm torn on the Georgia or the documents. It's one of those two.
I thought it was about the whole Stormy Daniels scandal.
This is something that you wonder, is it all mud? And it's hard. How many voters are like them that they're just seeing the mud, they're not seeing the details?
There's a real question as to how much the details that continue to emerge in court related to Trump are going to move where voters are at on these things, because there's already been so much out in relation to the former president. When it comes to the Biden side of the issue, though, there's actually a huge potential political landmine for President Biden. That is, Hunter Biden's lawyers have told DOJ that if they bring charges against him of being a drug user in possession of a gun, which is a felony, Hunter's lawyers have said that they will argue that statute is unconstitutional under the Second Amendment. That would mean that if Biden is running for president as someone arguing to constrain gun rights, Hunter's lawyers would be defending him by saying, no, those rights need to be broader. Lots of other criminal defense lawyers have made that case, but talk about a massive political headache for the White House.
One of the things the reason that it's probably worse for the Biden folks is because it's counter to what Biden has. The narrative is that I'm a family man who doesn't have a lot of drama. That's why you chose me. I'm here to put my hands on the way, exactly what Brendan's talking about. And most voters are not going to understand the differences about the things that are happening, right? You're special counsel, and that is the concern to folks. And the Biden folks, they have already resigned themselves that Hunter Biden was going to be used as a bludgeon against them during the campaign. They don't see this as that different.
The confusion there is exactly what I'm talking about. The Democrats need to realize that if you don't define this, Republicans are going to get in there and jump in and explain what happened. And they're going to tie it to the president. And they need to be very clear that no evidence has been found tying it to him.
Simone, Dean Phillips. I wanted to get you on Dean Phillips.
What about Dean Phillips?
Well, I had a feeling that. Do you think by the end of this, do you think that between Hunter Biden and this hand-wringing about him in general and his poll numbers, you think somebody more serious is going to jump in?
Chuck, I wrote down what Congressman Phillips said. He said, it's a call to action to ask the president to pass the torch My question is, where were these conversations when there were all of these articles from Politico to the Wall Street Journal and to Axios about the president not having announced a re-election campaign yet, wondering if he's going to get in and do it? That, I think, would have been the time where folks should, air these concerns and these grievances. I do not think there is a legitimate appetite for another Democratic candidate.
All right. You're going to get in, and again, so all of you will. We're going to come back. But when we come back, Ohio voters delivered a victory this week for supporters of abortion rights. From red states to blue states, abortion politics is actually less partisan than you might think. Data download is next. Welcome back, Data Download time, and yet another win for reproductive rights. This week, Ohio voters defeated a plan that would have made it more difficult to enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. The Ohio vote is just the latest example of how in state after state, voters are coming down on the side of abortion rights, and they're not just Democrats. Let me just show you here in Ohio. This was the overall number here, 57-43. Double-digit win for essentially the abortion rights side. Again, this was a one-off. This wasn't about abortion directly yet. That referendum will now take place in November in Ohio. Look, as you can see here, Donald Trump won Ohio by single digits. J.D. Vance won it by single digits. Mike DeWine won it by 25 points. There's a distinction here between these Republicans. MAGA, Mike DeWine, non-MAGA. Why am I bringing this up? Because it's important to understanding the issue of abortion. When you look at, do you approve of the overturning of Roe v. Wade? 2/3 of Republicans approved of it. When you break it up between those that are part of the Trump movement and those that aren't, you see the divide inside the party. MAGA Republicans approved of it at 80%. The non-MAGA wing, only 51% approved of that. And this is how you see it on the map. These are your suburban Republicans. These are these voters that have been going back and forth on Trump for some time. Here's the 2020 vote. You only saw there 7 counties that Joe Biden won. When you look at the 2023 ballot measure here on abortion rights, in each one of those urban areas that Biden won, there was spread. More of these suburban Republican-leaning counties ended up voting on the abortion rights side, be it around Cleveland, around Columbus, Toledo, even in and around Dayton. Guess what? We saw the same pattern in Kansas. Joe Biden only won 5 counties there, but when it was about abortion rights, you saw the suburban counties around Wichita, the suburban counties around Topeka, the suburban counties around Kansas City. Those counties, which narrowly went Republican in a presidential, ended up voting on the abortion rights side. Michigan saw the same thing. Again, in each of these cases, the metro area spread, if you will, those suburban counties. They are not Trump fans in general, and they're certainly not fans of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. 5 Americans imprisoned in Iran are now one step closer to home after the U.S. and Iranian governments reached a rare breakthrough this week that moved them to house arrest. It's the first step of a planned prisoner exchange in which the U.S. will also release $6 billion of frozen Iranian assets from South Korea. More than 40 years ago, President Jimmy Carter struggled to navigate the unfolding Iran hostage crisis at that time. And Joe Biden, then a senator on the Foreign Relations Committee, joined our broadcast to offer his perspective.
I think the most important thing, both for the American public and for the Iranians and the Ayatollah to understand, is that the president is cool, calm, and deliberate and logical about the steps he's going to take, showing absolute resolve, and not to go with a sense of bravado at this point and do what everyone from Ezra Weitzman to the man on the street knows would result in the immediate death of the hostages by some use of major military force. I think there's a logical progression, and I think it will result in the release of the hostages, but I have no crystal ball. God only knows.
Joe Biden was just in his second term in the Senate. When we come back, the 2024 lessons for both parties on the issue of abortion. More with the panel next. Welcome back. It's been 7 states post-Dobbs that we've seen, and anything related to abortion rights end up falling in favor of the abortion rights side. Brendan Buck, a lot of Republicans and conservatives are starting to rethink their stand on this issue. Here's Sean Hannity earlier this week.
I believe in the sanctity of life, but I think politically that Republicans have got to say, as Bill Clinton once said, I never thought I'd quote him, Rare, legal, and I'd add the word very early in a pregnancy. That seems to be politically where the country is. Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see. That vote in Ohio is pretty sobering.
How many elected Republicans share Sean Hannity's concern?
Probably more than a few, but I'm not holding my breath that the party's going to change position anytime. There is a large infrastructure in place. Getting people elected in Republican primaries where you basically have to assume a certain position that is much further to the right than I think a lot of people are. It's clearly a loser for us, but I think we're a long ways out from being able to recognize that and make any meaningful change.
That's interesting. I mean, this, as everybody hand rings about Biden and Trump, no pun intended, this is the Trump card for Democrats?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at 2022, everywhere that abortion was on the ballot, voters went and voted in support of codifying those rights into their state's constitution. This Ohio vote, I think, is in fact a precursor to what we will see this November, where I expect Ohioans are going to
identical vote.
Yeah,
probably,
they're going to go out and they're going to say, look, we want these rights enshrined in our constitution because people see what is happening. And I think that because the Vice President has been Vice President Harris has been very vocal on this issue, rallying folks across the country, reminding people that this is about freedom and about being able to make decisions between the healthcare professionals and you and your family and not politicians. That's something that resonates with folks.
You know, Eugene, Karl Rove in 2003 saw same-sex marriage propositions, anti-same-sex marriage proposition in swing states as a way to drive up turnout. Democrats are looking at protecting abortion rights, places like Arizona, maybe Florida.
No, absolutely. They know that the voters were scared after Dobbs, and the one thing that they have done a good job of is actually channeling that fear and anger, and this is one of the ways to do that, right? You look at Ohio as, is this a way that we can make sure that voters come out to vote in Novembers, whether that's this November or next November? Michigan, one of those. Florida is another one.
That Republican debate stage when abortion comes up, I'm going to be fascinated at how they all try to tiptoe around it all.
That's right, no question. It's one of the biggest challenges, one of the hottest potatoes, shall we say, for this tranche of Republican primary voters. It also raises a really interesting issue for Republican governors and state legislatures as they try to play defense against these ballot initiatives. Arkansas just passed a law making it harder to get ballot initiatives on the ballot. Instead of needing signatures of people from 15 counties, now you need 50
If you're changing
counties.
the rules rather than changing your position, you're still going to lose to the voters at some point. I mean, I just don't. It always found it fascinates me. People try to do.
I think it was really instructive the way that the debate played out. If you watch some of the ads in Ohio, the ads weren't even necessarily about abortion. They were warning, this is about transgender rights. You better watch out what's coming in here. They don't even want to take on the issue head on because they know it's a loser.
What a week. August, slow news month. That's all we have for today. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.